Welcome back to another Q&A, guys. So the first question this week comes from Emmanuel, and he asks a very interesting question that I kind of had to pause and kind of think about because I really haven't thought about it a whole heck of a lot. So what he asked was, if the primary goal is strength, would it make sense to have resensitization phases in the hypertrophy rep range? So if you primarily train for strength, would it make sense to have these resensitization blocks to where you have like higher rep ranges, more hypertrophy focused? And I would say if your primary goal is strength, it makes sense to have more hypertrophy oriented training blocks, but maybe less so for the reasons of resensitization. And let me explain that. So with hypertrophy, we run these resensitization blocks a little bit because we're pushing the high volumes so much. There's a chance that we become more and more adapted to that stimulus. So, hey, it might be a good idea to change that stimulus, to lower that stimulus a little bit, so then we can grow a little bit better when we come back to the higher volumes. And I think that for strength, we're not necessarily resensitizing for the sake of hypertrophy per se, but just running hypertrophy blocks for strength is probably a good idea, regardless, as a larger muscle is going to at least have more kind of strength potential, as a larger muscle is going to have more actin and myosin, be able to create more cross bridges, which produce force, some sciencey stuff there. So it's going to increase your strength potential. At least it would really make sense if it did so in theory. So I think that if your goal is maximum strength, then for at least periods of your training year, your goal should be maximum hypertrophy. Because if you're able to grow your muscles as much as possible, it's probably going to increase their strength potential. Now, you might do some things differently to where your exercise selection still might be more specific to the exercises that you want to get stronger in. You still might do some heavy singles to get some practice to maintain that skill of lifting heavier weights, stuff like that. But I do think that if your primary goal is strength, spending a lot of time in more hypertrophy focused blocks to make sure that you are building as much muscle as you can to grow or to increase your overall strength potential with a larger muscle cell, then that's probably a good idea. Now, is it necessarily for the purpose to resensitize you to strength gains and that sort of thing? I would say not really necessarily. I would say training with heavy weights is a skill, and if you go away from that for too long, you might actually desensitize yourself to that a little bit and have to kind of get used to it, which is kind of why I say that even in hypertrophy blocks, it might make sense to do some heavier singles and stuff like that. So I would say that if you're primarily focused on strength, I still think it makes sense to run plenty of hypertrophy blocks to grow your muscles, to increase your strength potential. But I don't think that those blocks are necessarily for the purpose to resensitize yourself to the stimulus of kind of strength training and being able to have those strength adaptations. So hopefully that was clear. I feel like that explanation was kind of dog shit. So if you have any follow-ups, Emmanuel, absolutely let me know in the comments below. All right. So I appreciate your question, man. The second question: is fish oil worth it for the purpose of bodybuilding, growing muscle? And I would say that for the specific purpose of building muscle, I don't think that fish oil is going to do anything special for you. I really don't. I think that could there be some people that have a positive response and maybe benefit from fish oil regarding their body composition? Maybe. I'm not going to completely close the door on that. But is that a detail that I really don't think is going to make a difference whatsoever in the long run. Yeah, I do. I don't think that. I think that I even think that, so creatine, for example, it has a lot more evidence supporting like actual strength and hypertrophy adaptations, which makes sense because we use creatine as an energy source, which might allow us to kind of train harder and stuff like that. So even with creatine, over the course of like 5 to 7 years, if you ask me, would I expect a large difference in muscle mass between someone that took creatine and didn't take creatine, all else equal over the course of 5 years? I would not expect a big difference whatsoever. And if I operate under the assumption that fish oil is far less significant than creatine, then we're talking about trivial differences for muscle growth. I don't think that matter a whole lot. Now, could fish oil potentially help for general health and stuff like that? And do I think that being generally as healthy as possible is going to help building muscle? Yeah, I think that a healthy body is going to be able to put on more muscle. That's not necessarily something I've really dug into the research on. Like, do other just general health markers correlate with muscle growth and stuff like that? I haven't really looked at that, but my assumption would be that would make sense. Although the reason we do science is because our assumptions are often wrong. So take that with a grain of salt for sure. But I do think that if we operate under the assumption that fish oil could help overall health, then yeah, maybe there is some small but minor positive benefits that you could get for it regarding strength and hypertrophy. Now, does fish oil help overall health? I would say the results are mixed, to where, there was a Cochrane systematic research review 2018 through 2019, somewhere in there. 2020's been a year, ladies and gentlemen. But somewhere in there that kind of suggested that, fish oil supplementation might not do a whole lot. Now, there's other research suggesting that maybe it does do some stuff. So, as usual, results are pretty mixed there, but I'm definitely not sold on it. It's not something I recommend to my clients, and it's not something that I think is going to make a large difference with hypertrophy either way. So, I tend to say just get a coach instead of buying these different supplements and stuff like that. But I'm also a coach, so there's that. All right. Next question. Peri-workout nutrition recommendations, ? So I think that during certain phases of the year, peri-workout nutrition probably becomes more or less important. So I think that while you're deep into a cutting phase, I would say peri-workout nutrition probably becomes a little bit more important, as when you're gaining, you're just kind of always have enough energy all the time. And you're probably almost always like processing food and stuff like that. So since that's going to be just more a constant flow of energy that you're have available to use, full glycogen stores, stuff like that, nice chubby cheeks that I got going on here, while you got all that going, I don't think that you need to worry about, your specific nutrient timing a whole lot. Now, I personally still generally like, even while gaining, having, the majority of my carbs, like 50. And when I say majority, I'm not talking like 80 or 90%. I'm talking like maybe half of my daily carbs kind of around my workout. So if I'm eating 300 carbs, for example, I might have like 60 pre-workout, 60 post-workout, and then 20 to 30 intra-workout, something like that. That's kind of what I'm talking. Not like crazy, and I also don't think that it's a huge deal if you don't do this. But that's kind of my general approach, kind of all the time, is having about 50+% of my carbs kind of around my workout. There could be benefits regarding maybe slightly for performance, maybe not so much while gaining. And then maybe for recovery, having that meal, kind of rest and digest, that sort of thing, and maybe some intra-workout carbohydrates. I personally like them. Most of my clients also like them. I just have about, I think, anywhere from 10 to 30 grams, like in a cutting phase. When you don't have a lot of carbs to spare, maybe I go more towards 10. But somewhere in there, Could it be placebo? Yeah, absolutely. But I generally feel a little bit better sipping on something a little sugary while I work out. There's some research suggesting that it might help with performance and it might help with ameliorating, which I believe is a fancy word for just kind of mitigating or preventing a little bit of muscle damage. And I think that this acts through like the insulin pathways and stuff like that. But we probably don't need to get into the details of that a whole lot. And there could be those benefits there. So in general, throughout all phases, I do like to have about 50+% of my carbs around my workout and a little bit of something intra-workout, just trying it out. Now, during a cutting phase, when we have less energy overall, I do think that this probably becomes a little bit more important, and I would more strictly recommend to abide by that general recommendation while cutting. As I think it becomes more important, the leaner you get, the less food you have available, that acute influx of energy can really help out during a training session, to where then I think it becomes more important to like, hey, let's actually make sure we get some pre-workout carbs in here. Maybe we make sure to get 10 grams of carbs during our workout. And I would probably front load things a little bit more pre-workout to have that energy throughout the workout, even if it is just a little placebo. But during a cutting phase, I do think it becomes a little bit more important. So in sum, I do generally like about 50+% of my carbs kind of around my workout, a little bit intra-workout, and that's during all phases. But in cutting phases, I might be a little bit more strict on that and maybe even lean towards having a little bit of that energy coming in a little bit closer to my pre-workout window. All right. So hope that helps. And the final question here this week is, they can't feel their back while they're training. What should they do? And this is something that I definitely struggled with kind of earlier on in my training career, when I think it's especially difficult because you're still learning the different movement patterns and kind of what works best for you. And on top of that, you probably don't have a ton of musculature in your back anyways. So it's really hard to connect with a muscle that isn't really there, or isn't built to the degree to where you really can engage with it and feel what it's like to train that muscle. And the solution to that is keep training your back and growing it over time. And I think that a big part of this question is just sticking with it, keep doing movements that feel pretty good for you right now, but focus on really good technique, working through a full range of motion, really get that nice stretch at the end range of motion and feel your lats really get pulled on. And then at end range of motion, pause that end range of motion, really squeeze that. And over time, it will feel better and better. One cue that I really like is to think when you're pulling the weight towards you, think pushing your chest out. So as you're doing a pull down, thinking about pushing your chest out and up. So you're thinking about pushing your chest out and up to the weight, pulling your chest up while kind of arcing your back and really squeezing that back as hard as you can. And then on rows, pushing your chest out to when you're pulling it in. And then also like a slight kind of crunch to the side that you're rowing to, that can also kind of help with that feel. So the biggest things here for me are, if you're still getting used to doing back movements and stuff like that, focus on really good technique and give it a little bit of time. It will start feeling better. And getting that full stretch at peak contraction, or full stretch when you're at that peak kind of eccentric portion of lowering the weight, and that full pause at peak contraction, pushing your chest out to the weight or up to the weight on pull downs, and then maybe even having a slight crunch on those kind of single arm movements and stuff like that. I think that all those things have really helped me and can definitely help you out. So I hope that helps. I appreciate the questions, guys. If you have any additional questions, just let me know. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in that next one. All right. See you guys.